Okay, welcome to this A-level anthology by Wilcockson, and this is ethics, and this is euthanasia. Let's read it. Number 2, double effect. Another indirect argument has a long tradition in natural law ethics and involves two kinds of intention. According to the double effect DDE argument, doctrine of double effect, there is a difference between foreseeing an event and directly intending or willing it to happen. The emphasis, therefore, is different from the act and omissions argument, where the agent foresaw what was to happen and allowed it to happen. For instance, A defend themselves against attack from B using reasonable force. They know that this might result in B's death, but it's not their intention that this should happen. If B then dies as a result of A's defense, the doctrine of double effect does not hold A to be blameworthy of an act they did not intend. In case 3, a doctor who subscribes to the doctrine of double effect might argue that the principle of sound medicine, as well as established principle of natural law ethics, is therefore acceptable in Roman Catholic theology. However, the term euthanasia is resisted in the same way that abortion is avoided for similar reasons. The doctrine of double effect is open to abuse. Is there a satisfactory distinction between intending and foreseeing? Might one say that the doctrine of double effect is bad medicine? That if I foresee death but fail to act, then this is an omission, which is a form of indirect euthanasia, which is rejected by the sanctity of life. Clever argument. Well, let's have a think about his account and his critique of the doctrine of double effect. Well, he says, has a long tradition, an indirect argument that has a long tradition in natural law ethics. To understand the doctrine of double effect, you have to understand natural law ethics before we get to the idea of intention and the two kinds of intention. Well, what is natural law ethics? Well, let's do some revision. So natural law has these primary precepts, the primary precepts that describe the purpose of human life. A good person is one who fulfills their purpose, their primary aims and purposes. Something is contrary to our God-given purpose or function, it's wrong. All living things strive to survive and reproduce. As rational beings, we have other purposes peculiar to us: education, living in a civilized society with rules. These are all reasonable, rational rules. These are underpinned by the belief that God made us with specific purpose to flourish. So what we can kind of summarize these in the word world. So world, worship, to worship God; to O, live in an ordered society; to R, reproduce; to L, to learn; and most importantly, D, to defend the innocent. So the first precept is that last one, is to the preservation of life. These secondary precepts of natural moral law lead to thus a deontological argument based on duty. Once we discern through true reason in accord with nature what the duty is, our moral duty, we have a duty to defend the weak, to preserve life. So such duty-based theories contain rules that we must follow rather than judging something of value like pleasure, happiness, fulfillment, preferences that we need to bring about. These lead to secondary principles. That the primary principles are absolute; they're derived from the secondary principles are absolute; they're derived from primary precepts, have no other exceptions. So if the primary precept is reproduction, then using contraception is wrong. The secondary principle is don't abort, or don't do euthanasia, don't experiment in embryos, don't divorce. The secondary precepts are derived from the primary precepts using reason. Well, natural law, God and the eternal law. There are four kinds of law: the divine law, the eternal law, that's the law that's in the mind of God, and out of that comes the Bible; the divine law, the natural moral law, and the human law. Aquinas held that belief in God as creator is essential in understanding our purpose as human beings. Very positive view of humanity. Belief we're made in God's image, designed for perfection. It's contrasting Calvin, didn't it? The way to fulfill God's given potential is to follow the natural law, which in turn represents the Bible, the divine law, and ultimately the eternal law, which is the principles by which God governs the universe, what's in his mind, what's in his head, as it were. He has a head. And we can know this in part using reason, for we can know what is right for humans. We can determine the natural law, which is part of the eternal law. That relates to human choices. Following the natural law will not lead us to perfection in this life, as it can only be achieved after death. But it can help us be virtuous, and that's important. So ultimately, it's all about doing good and avoiding evil. Just as the natural law is an unhelpful term, an artificial limb is natural because it helps us fulfill our purpose or nature, so is doing good. We think of the good that is done, the outcome or consequences. A better summary of natural law theory would be do good actions and avoid evil actors. This has been called the Cinders Rule, do good and avoid evil. Theory looks at the action itself. For example, the act of lying is wrong, even though lying sometimes leads to good outcomes. Doing good means telling the truth. An abortion for a 9-year-old rape victim may save her life, but it involves killing an innocent fetus, and so it's an evil act. According to natural law, we must only do good actions, never evil actions, even if the bad acts leads to good outcomes. So what is the doctrine of double effect? Well, the doctrine of double effect takes us towards proportionalism, and within euthanasia, the notion of burdensome care. Many actions have unintended secondary effects, but the intention is to do good, if in some cases it would be obviously wrong to perform the act. Now, in euthanasia terms, maybe multiply saving a heart attack patient. That's burdensome, it's unnecessary. Letting nature take its course is understood by doctors then. You can give them care, but you don't need to resusc over and over and over and over again to make them endure unnecessary suffering rather than let them die, as it were. Your intention must be blameless. The intention is to save life, to preserve life where possible, and it's not always possible. Even if you know the harm will happen, your intention should be blameless. This brings in an element of proportionalism to see the secondary effects, consequences outweigh the benefits of performing the act. So are they proportionate, needs to be asked. So is the DDD successful as a principle? Well, this is what this whole section is considering. The difference between foreseeing an event and intending or willing it to happen, the emphasis therefore is different. The acts and omissions, for instance, A can defend themselves. All of this, they know this might result in B's death. That's a good description of it. If B then dies as a result of A's defense, the doctrine of double effect does not hold A to be blameworthy. Okay, all well and good. But in this case, a doctor subscribed to DDD might argue that in principle it's sound medicine. Here's where it gets trouble. It's sound medicine. It's sound medicine, as well as establishing the principle of natural law ethics. It is therefore acceptable in Roman Catholic theology. So the doctor who subscribes to natural moral law will see the doctrine of double effect as good as part of good and sound medicine. The intention is to save life, not, and that's well understood. Is it successful in principle? Well, the principle or doctrine of double effect is often invoked to explain the permissibility of an action that causes a serious harm, such as the death of a human being. It's a side effect of doing some good. So someone is in great pain and you give them more morphine, but you know the morphine will end their life more quickly. You're killing the pain, not the patient, although you can foresee that the patient will die more quickly. According to this principle of double effect, sometimes it's permissible to cause great harm as a side effect of bringing about good result, even though it would not be permissible to cause such harm as a means of bringing about the same good end. So it comes under fire. It comes under fire, but is Is the doctrine of double effect open to abuse? Is it open to abuse? And the question is there a satisfactory distinction between intending and foreseeing? Well, this is to confuse two things. None of us have perfect intention. We all have mixed motives. The notion is, though, that we should act to the best of our knowledge according to what we understand as the right thing to do. And even though we foresee causing harm, or even though we foresee ending life early, the intention needs to be good. Now, he argues, one might say that doctrine of double effect is bad medicine. Wow, that's a big criticism. That if it foresees death but fails to act, but sometimes you can't act if someone is dying anyway. All you can do is treat their pain. What actions? This is quite an argument from silence here. But if they fail to act, well, this assumes that there's a possible action to take, and so often there isn't. Then this is an omission, whether it's the enormously premature baby that's so you don't have the means to keep them alive. Is that a failure to act? You just can't act. It is an omission. But is it, as it's claimed here, which is a form of indirect euthanasia? Which is rigid. Well, is it? That's a question. Well, certainly this is what Singer would argue, and Wilcockson seems to be arguing here too. And you have to ask yourself, is the doctrine of double effect bad as a result? If you agree with Singer, you're likely to say it is. If you don't, then you're likely not to say it is. So the doctrine of double effect comes under fire for this difficulty of distinguishing intention and foresight. Here we're back to things like the trolley problem and the relevance of the doctrine of double effect in explaining our basic intuitions. The difference in the particulars matters. Specific cases are important. The difference in permissibility in the trolley problem seems to depend on whether the death of the person is a means or a side effect of saving them. Now, using a person to save the life of other people, our intuitions tell us is wrong. A person dying because we're trying to save them, well, that's different to a person dying because we're trying to save other people, because we're using them as a means. So there's three different ways people think about this. Consequentialists, like Singer, view the widespread reluctance of people to push people off the bridge in order to stop and save the five as just irrational. Singer would say, start pushing, get going, kick the person off the bridge. And you can think of any number of events in the First and Second World War where generals did just that. Most people find that difficult to stomach, though, don't they? Well, what about the second group and the way they understand this stuff? Second, there are those who take the paired intuitions of the trolley problem as proof of the fundamental role of double effect as an implicit principle guiding moral judgment. You can't get away from the double effect principle. It's an intuitive principle that seems to be implicit. Well, is it? Philippa Foot famously argues this, an implicit moral principle. And then finally, we got this last group of people who say it would be wrong for a bystander to switch the trolley, and suggest that people's willingness to use one person to prevent the death of many is just inadequate or insufficient emotional engagement. And they would uphold the principle of double effect, but deny it provides permission to swerve the trolley. Well, Anscombe famously argues this, and it's a really strong argument. So is the doctrine of double effect bad ethics? Is it bad medicine? Well, Wilcockson thinks it is, sort of. He's arguing that way. Is he right, though? I'll let it be your choice. So this was section 7.